The clubhouse does not have a primary bathroom, Mrs. Keene. At 7:15 on a warm October morning, Reed Bellweather stood on his front porch at the quiet end of Cressmere Hollow Court, holding a contractor invoice beneath the pale light above his door. Across the cul-de-sac, sprinkler heads hissed in measured bursts. Wet leaves clung to the curb, and the HOA's electric golf cart hummed past the brick mailboxes as if it were patrolling a private border. The air carried the sharp smell of fresh mulch and hot motor oil from a landscaping trailer idling near the entrance. One address changed everything. Reed was 63, white-haired, broad-shouldered, and usually invisible by choice, a widower who kept his lawn neat, his blinds half closed, and his conversations brief. Most neighbors assumed he had spent his career somewhere in construction, though none knew he had once audited multi-million-dollar building claims by tracing costs through purchase orders, delivery tickets, change directives, and payment certifications. He noticed details because details had paid his salary for 34 years. He never guessed. The envelope had arrived with the HOA's new Common Property Preservation Initiative, a glossy packet demanding that every household contribute toward clubhouse improvements, entry landscaping, and interior community asset renewal. Reed had expected a cold portal notice or certified letter with a deadline buried in fine print. Instead, tucked behind the assessment schedule was an invoice for custom walnut cabinetry, imported pendant lighting, heated bathroom flooring, and 12 linear feet of premium quartz, all coded to the clubhouse renovation account. The worksite address belonged to Marla Keene. That was not a typo. By 8 o'clock, the click of narrow heels crossed Reed's gravel side path, each step too sharp for the soft morning, and Marla appeared beside his hydrangeas in a cream blazer, polished pumps, and a gold-edged badge reading HOA President. She carried her leather-covered clipboard against her chest and raised her phone to photograph the side gate, the rain barrel, and a stack of cedar boards Reed had placed beneath the eaves. The boards had been there less than a day, but Marla announced that she was conducting an urgent exterior compliance review prompted by possible visual storage violations. Then she asked for the packet. Reed did not move. Marla explained that a confidential vendor document had been included by clerical error and that retaining it could interfere with HOA procurement. Her perfume mixed strangely with the damp earth and the faint chlorine drifting from the community pool behind the clubhouse. Reed watched the status light from his wide-angle porch camera reflect faintly in the glass of her phone. Everything was being preserved. He handed her the original paper packet after scanning every page on the printer in his study, then asked why a community invoice listed her home as the delivery and installation address. Marla's smile tightened, but her voice remained smooth. She said presidents sometimes receive project materials temporarily for administrative convenience. Reed looked again at the line marked Owner Approval, where Marla Keene had signed beneath the words Residential Kitchen and Primary Bath Completion. The golf cart stopped at the curb behind her. The neighborhood went silent. Reed lifted his eyes and asked, "When did the clubhouse get a primary bath?" Marla lowered the clipboard. For the first time, the certainty in her expression slipped. By 10:43 that morning, the first notice appeared in Reed Bellweather's HOA portal with no greeting, no explanation, and no name attached to the decision. A second alert followed 12 minutes later, then a third, each announced by the same sterile electronic chime from his phone while dry leaves scraped across the back patio. Outside, a landscaping crew fed branches into a wood chipper near the clubhouse, filling the air with the bitter smell of crushed pine and warm diesel. Marla had moved fast. The first charge was $418.63 for unauthorized vendor contact, even though Reed had contacted no vendor. The second was $286.47 for procurement disruption review, and the third was $242.16 for administrative routing correction. Together, the portal demanded $947.26 within 10 business days. Precision made nonsense look official. Reed printed every notice on plain white paper, wrote the exact download time in the upper right corner, and placed each page inside a separate clear sleeve. His study was narrow and quiet, lined with old reference binders, a steel filing cabinet, and a drafting table his late wife had once used for quilting patterns. The room smelled faintly of paper, cedar polish, and coffee that had gone cold beside his keyboard. He did not appeal. Instead, he opened a scanned contractor invoice and began reading it the way he once examined disputed construction claims. The document carried the clubhouse project code, but the materials told another story. Walnut cabinet fronts in residential dimensions, heated floor membrane-sized for a private bathroom, 2 pendant lights from a luxury kitchen collection, and a quartz slab cut around a farmhouse sink. None belonged in the clubhouse. Reed enlarged the billing section and found 4 payment references tied to that invoice, suggesting the document captured only part of a larger series of facilities draws. The amounts were irregular, but their spacing was not. Every payment sat just below the threshold that required a recorded board vote. That was deliberate. At noon, Reed walked the public sidewalk around the clubhouse with his phone held at chest level. The pool pump droned behind the locked fence. A loose flag rope tapped against the aluminum pole, and chlorine drifted through the warm air from water covered with floating autumn leaves. Through the front windows, he saw the same laminate counters, the same beige tile, and the same fluorescent ceiling panels that had been there for years. Nothing had been renovated. He photographed only what was visible from common property, then returned home and submitted a narrowly worded records request through the HOA portal. He asked for the board resolution authorizing the project, the complete vendor contract, all delivery receipts, and the certification identifying which common asset had received the work. He offered no theory. 46 minutes later, Marla denied the request, citing vendor confidentiality and operational security. Reed saved the denial, exported the portal activity log, and printed both. Then he created a spreadsheet with columns for invoice number, project code, payment date, delivery location, approval authority, and benefited property. Most of the cells remained blank. Blank cells were useful. Just before sunset, a red compliance tag appeared beneath the windshield wiper of Reed's truck, its plastic edge clicking softly against the glass in the evening breeze. It warned that further inquiry into vendor matters could result in continuing penalties and collection review. Reed removed it without tearing the paper, slipped it into another clear sleeve, and looked toward the clubhouse as its automatic lights flickered on. Marla thought she was closing the record. She was building it. The next morning, Reed Bellweather began with 3 years of monthly financial statements and annual budget summaries, not the invoice. He spread the statements across his dining table while the furnace clicked beneath the floor, rain ticked against the back windows, and the smell of wet oak drifted in through a narrow gap above the sink. On 6 separate lines, he found the same phrase, community interior preservation. Words can hide a room. Each payment carried a slightly different description, yet every one used the same contractor code and drew money from the reserve account assigned to shared facilities. The amounts varied by a few $100s. The approval dates fell near the end of separate billing cycles, and none appeared in the meeting minutes distributed to homeowners. Reed entered them into his spreadsheet without highlighting a single cell. Color could wait. At 9:17, he submitted a second records request through the HOA portal, this one citing the section of the governing documents that allowed members to inspect financial books during normal business hours. He requested no private banking information, no employee records, and no personal data, only contracts, payment approvals, delivery documentation, and the board action supporting each withdrawal. The request was narrow enough to fit on one page. Marla answered with silence. By noon, the cul-de-sac had dried beneath a cold white sun, and the HOA golf cart rolled slowly past Reed's house twice. Its tires whispered over damp pavement, a plastic clipboard rattled in the rear basket, and the driver paused long enough to photograph the red tag no longer attached to Reed's truck. Reed watched from behind the kitchen curtain. He did not wave. In his study, he replayed the recording from his door camera and saved 2 copies, one to an external drive and one to a password-protected archive. The footage showed Marla crossing from the public sidewalk onto his side yard, photographing his property, and demanding the return of the packet before claiming she was conducting an emergency inspection. Her voice was clear, the timestamp was exact, and the edge of her HOA badge caught the morning light each time she turned. She had documented herself. That afternoon, Lydia Pike opened Reed's records request in her capacity as treasurer and read it 3 times. She sat inside the clubhouse office with the stale smell of copier toner around her, the vending machine humming against one wall, and a ceiling vent clicking each time the heat came on. Her signature appeared on several payment authorizations, but she could not remember seeing a full contract. That troubled her. Reed made one phone call to Russell Crowley, the contractor's project administrator, and kept his language careful. He asked only whether Russell's company had performed work at the clubhouse under the project code shown on the invoice. Russell paused, said he could not discuss client records without formal authorization, and added that the code Reed mentioned did not identify the physical job site. It was not an answer. It was enough. Reed added a new column labeled delivery address and left every row blank. At 6:42 that evening, Marla sent an email to the entire board accusing Reed of obstructing vendor operations, harassing contractors, and attempting to undermine a duly authorized community project. The message arrived while wood smoke drifted from a chimney across the street and the last lawn sprinkler coughed water onto an empty sidewalk. Reed printed the email, noted the time, and placed it behind the invoice. Let her keep signing. The daily penalty began at 12:01 a.m. on Thursday, announced by a portal notification that flashed across Reed Bellweather's phone while wind pushed acorns against the roof like small stones. The notice added $73.84 for each day he failed to cease unauthorized procurement interference, plus a one-time $312.58 pre-lien processing reserve. Outside, the cul-de-sac lay under amber streetlights. The irrigation valves clicked beneath the grass, and a delivery truck groaned somewhere beyond the entrance road. Marla wanted the hour to feel official. By breakfast, Reed's account showed a projected balance for the next 30 days, complete with a red warning banner stating that unresolved charges could advance to collection review. He saved the page as a PDF, printed the calculation table, and compared its date field with the governing document spread beside his coffee. The HOA's own collection policy required a board-authorized delinquency, a written opportunity to dispute, and a waiting period before any lien-related expense could be assessed. None had occurred. The threat was ahead of the process. At 11, Marla staged what she called a community renewal preview at the clubhouse. A rental van delivered 2 decorative planters, a rolled area rug, and 3 box lamps, while a photographer arranged residents near the entrance under a vinyl banner. The air smelled of hot asphalt and cinnamon cider from a folding refreshment table, and the pool gate squealed each time someone leaned against it. Marla posed beside the old laminate counter without letting anyone enter the back rooms. It was theater. Reed watched from the public sidewalk, noting that the boxes carried retail return labels and that no contractor vehicles were present. He took no photographs of residents, only the building exterior, the temporary banner, and the delivery van's arrival time. Marla noticed him and smiled broadly for the photographer before turning away. Confidence needed an audience. That afternoon, Lydia Pike called from a number Reed did not recognize and asked to meet at a diner 2 miles outside the neighborhood. The booth smelled of grilled onions and strong coffee. Silverware clattered behind the counter, and rainwater slid down the front windows in narrow gray lines. Lydia arrived in a navy raincoat, kept both hands around her mug, and spoke without looking toward the door. She said Marla had never presented a full contract. Instead, she brought single-page payment authorizations to Lydia's house, usually near the end of the month, and described each as routine maintenance already approved within the president's spending authority. Lydia remembered signing 6 of them. Reed asked for no copies and requested no confidential information. He only asked whether the board had voted on custom cabinetry, heated flooring, premium quartz, or residential lighting. Lydia shook her head. That was enough. She wrote the 6 signing dates on the back of a paper placemat, then hesitated before sliding it across the table. Reed did not take it immediately. He asked whether she was certain. Lydia said Marla always chose amounts below the board vote threshold and often waited until other directors had left town or stopped checking email. A pattern emerged. Back home, Reed entered the 6 dates into his spreadsheet and matched them against the reserve withdrawals. Each authorization fell within 48 hours of payment, and every payment landed just beneath the approval ceiling. The numbers formed steps. At 8:16 p.m., Reed opened another notice sent by certified mail, the tracking barcode still visible across the front of the envelope. Marla warned that continued resistance could damage property values and force the association to protect its financial interests. Reed placed the letter beside the others, closed the file, and listened as rain began tapping evenly against the study window. She thought pressure would make him answer. It made the timeline cleaner. Marla scheduled the special meeting for Monday at 7, using the shortest notice period permitted by the bylaws. The notice appeared on every front door in a white plastic sleeve, arrived again through the HOA portal, and was repeated on a sandwich board beside the clubhouse entrance. By sunrise, cold air carried the smell of damp grass and burnt coffee from a landscaping thermos, while the sign's metal frame knocked against the brick walkway in the wind. She wanted a crowd. The agenda listed 3 items in careful order: retroactive approval of the community interior preservation expenditures, confirmation of Reed Bellweather's accumulated violations, and authorization to advance his account towards civil collection. A footnote stated that resident comments would be limited to 2 minutes and could not include confidential vendor matters. Marla had built the meeting around silence. Reed printed the agenda and placed it beside the payment schedule. The portal projected that his daily charges would reach $1,242.62 by Monday, and it now displayed an additional $184.39 meeting preparation compliance fee. He did not dispute it. Numbers at absurd deserved witnesses. At 9:20, Reed submitted one final inspection request, identifying each record by date and transaction number. He also sent a preservation notice to the board, asking that no invoice, delivery receipt, email, approval sheet, or electronic ledger entry connected to the expenditures be altered or discarded while the dispute remained open. His language was plain, procedural, and free of accusation. The message changed the temperature. Inside the clubhouse office, the copier ran in uneven bursts while Marla assembled voting packets. The room smelled of heated plastic, lemon cleaner, and dust from the old ceiling vents, and Lydia Pike watched Marla remove several pages from one packet before sealing it. When Lydia asked whether directors would receive the full contractor file, Marla said the president had discretion to summarize operational material. Lydia stopped signing. Across town, Russell Crowley received a formal request forwarded by Nora Vance, the board member who owned a small accounting business. Unlike Reed's earlier question, Nora's request was transmitted through the property manager under her inspection authority as a sitting director, and it asked for the complete project file connected to the code on the invoice. Russell responded before lunch with a digital folder containing the signed proposal, delivery tickets, completion photographs, the site confirmation form, and the related project code correspondence. Every site-specific document named Marla's address. The file contained every record needed to trace the work from authorization to installation. Nora opened the photographs in her office above a hardware store, where traffic hissed over wet pavement and the smell of sawdust rose from the loading dock below. The images showed walnut cabinetry, pale quartz, imported pendant lights, and a tiled bathroom floor under construction. In one photograph, Marla stood beside the new kitchen island holding the same leather clipboard she carried through the neighborhood. Nora called Lydia immediately. By late afternoon, Nora forwarded Reed a written confirmation from Russell stating that the company had not performed the listed work at the clubhouse. Reed saved the message, added it to his chronology, and completed the final column in his spreadsheet. The delivery address matched the benefited property every time. At dusk, Marla walked the cul-de-sac in a burgundy blazer, stopping at driveways to tell residents that Monday's vote would protect the association from one homeowner's obstruction. Gravel clicked beneath her heels, fireplace smoke settled between the houses, and porch lights came on one by one behind her. Reed watched from his study window without opening the curtain. She was still campaigning. At 8:37 p.m., Nora emailed the directors and requested that the full contractor file be projected during the meeting. Marla replied that the documents could be misunderstood without executive context. Reed read the exchange once, closed his laptop, and set 3 questions on a single index card. He needed nothing else. Monday's meeting belonged to Marla. So did every answer. By 6:45 Monday evening, every folding chair in the clubhouse was occupied, and another dozen residents stood along the back wall beneath the framed pool rules. The old HVAC unit pushed warm air through dusty vents. Paper cups of coffee steamed beside the sign-in sheet, and wet coats carried the smell of rain and cold pavement into the room. Marla Keene sat at the center table in an ivory blazer with her leather clipboard squared before her. She looked untouchable. Lydia Pike sat 2 chairs away, pale and silent, while Nora Vance placed a closed laptop beside the projector controls. Reed Bellweather chose a seat in the second row, carrying one thin folder and a single index card. He did not bring a binder. Marla opened the meeting with a prepared statement about stability, neighborhood reputation, and the duty of the board to protect shared resources from disruptive behavior. Her heels clicked against the tile each time she shifted beneath the table. The microphone gave a low burst of feedback, and the fluorescent lights hummed above the crowded room. She spoke for 11 minutes. Reed said nothing. When the agenda reached his account, Marla read each charge into the record, including the $1,242.62 accumulated balance and the $184.39 meeting preparation compliance fee. She described his document requests as excessive, his call to the contractor as interference, and his questions as a threat to the association's contractual relationships. Several residents glanced toward Reed. He remained still. Marla then asked the board to confirm the penalties and authorize the next stage of civil collection review. Nora raised one hand and requested that Reed be allowed to respond before any vote. Marla reminded the room that homeowners were limited to 2 minutes, then smiled as if the limit settled everything. Reed stood. He placed the index card on the lectern, looked once at Marla, and asked his first question. What materials were installed at the clubhouse? The room quieted so completely that the pool pump could be heard through the exterior wall, pulsing in slow mechanical intervals. Marla said the project involved interior preservation components and administrative staging materials. Reed asked her to identify one installed item. She did not. His second question was simpler. Who certified that the work was complete? Marla replied that the contractor had followed standard closeout procedures and that executive documentation was not subject to open discussion. Reed turned slightly toward Lydia. Lydia lowered her eyes. The answer had no name. Reed asked his third question. What was the delivery address? A chair creaked near the back wall. Rainwater dripped from an umbrella onto the tile, and someone beside the coffee station stopped stirring a paper cup. Marla said delivery logistics were handled through an authorized administrative location. Reed looked toward Nora. Nora opened her laptop. On the projection screen appeared the invoice Reed had received in the assessment packet, enlarged until the address line could be read from the back row. Marla's home address filled the wall. She leaned toward the microphone and said it was merely a billing contact used for convenience. Reed did not challenge her explanation. He asked Nora to display the next page. A delivery ticket appeared beside the invoice, bearing the same address, the same project code, and Marla's signature beneath the words materials received at job site. The room changed. Marla stopped smiling. For several seconds, only the projector fan made a sound. The enlarged delivery ticket showed custom walnut panels, radiant floor membrane, 2 imported pendant fixtures, and a quartz slab cut to residential dimensions, all received at Marla Keene's address. Rain tapped against the clubhouse windows. Damp wool and burnt coffee hung in the crowded room, and the pool pump thudded behind the wall like a slow heartbeat. The paper was patient. Marla reached for her microphone and said her home had served as a temporary receiving location because the clubhouse lacked secure storage. Reed nodded once, then asked Nora Vance to display the installation record. A second document appeared, carrying the same address and Marla's signature beneath a certification that the materials had been installed, tested, and accepted at the job site. Storage did not explain installation. Nora advanced to the contractor's completion photographs. The screen filled with a bright residential kitchen, walnut cabinets rising around a farmhouse sink, pale quartz stretching across a large island, and pendant lights hanging above upholstered stools. In the next image, heated flooring cables crossed a private bathroom beneath newly laid tile. Marla herself stood near the island, holding her leather clipboard. A low murmur moved through the back row. Reed returned to the lectern and placed his spreadsheet under the document camera. 6 reserve withdrawals appeared in chronological order, each matched to a contractor billing document, a delivery ticket, and an authorization signed within 48 hours. Every payment fell below the amount, requiring a recorded board vote. The pattern was exact. Lydia Pike leaned toward her microphone, her voice unsteady but clear. She said Marla had brought the authorization sheets to her separately, described them as routine clubhouse maintenance, and never shown her the full contract, delivery address, or completion photographs. She confirmed that the board had not voted on cabinetry, heated floors, quartz counters, or residential lighting. One signature had hidden 6 decisions. Marla turned toward Lydia and reminded her that officers were expected to support board unity. Lydia removed her treasurer's pen from the table and set it beside the microphone. "Unity does not change an address," she said. A chair scraped near the back wall. Reed asked Nora to display the final email in the contractor folder. It showed Marla instructing Russell Crowley's office to keep using the clubhouse project code because the reserve allocation had already been opened under interior preservation, even though the site confirmation form listed her home as the physical work site. The projector light washed the color from Marla's face. Her badge suddenly looked too large. She claimed her renovated home functioned as an unofficial reception space where she met vendors and represented the neighborhood. Reed did not raise his voice. He asked her to identify the covenant, budget resolution, or recorded board action allowing community reserve funds to improve a director's private residence. Marla flipped through her packet, first quickly, then page by page, while the microphone carried every dry movement of paper across the room. Nothing appeared. Nora asked whether any resident had been informed that association funds were paying for improvements to Marla's home. Marla said the board had granted her broad operational discretion. Lydia said it had not. The audience shifted away from Marla, as if the room itself had changed sides. Reed placed the original penalty notices beside the payment chart and explained that his questions began only after the invoice had been mailed to him by the HOA. The charges for vendor contact, procurement disruption, administrative routing, daily friction, collection preparation, and meeting compliance had followed his request for the supporting records. Retaliation had created its own ledger. Nora closed the contractor folder and made a formal motion to freeze Marla's spending authority, suspend every penalty against Reed, and preserve all financial records pending independent review. Another director seconded before Marla could speak. Hands rose around the board table. Her power ended quietly. The vote passed 4-1, and Marla Keene was the only person who raised a hand against it. Acting on the approved motion, the board directed the property manager to disable Marla's payment authority before the meeting ended. Lydia Pike surrendered the association checkbook, and the secretary entered the suspension into the minutes, while residents watched from rows of metal chairs. The projector fan whirred above the silence. Rainwater gathered beneath folded umbrellas, and the room smelled of damp carpet and overheated coffee. Authority vanished in one motion. Marla demanded an executive session, but by a second vote, the board designated Nora as acting chair for matters related to the review and determined that the spending freeze required no closed personnel discussion. The board then appointed a 3-member review committee with no prior role in the disputed payments and authorized an independent accounting firm to examine every reserve withdrawal tied to the contractor code. Reed Bellweather returned to his seat without smiling. He had not come for applause. By Wednesday morning, every penalty on Reed's account had been marked suspended, including the $418.63 vendor charge, the $286.47 procurement fee, the $242.16 routing charge, the $73.84 daily assessments, the $312.58 collection reserve, and the $184.39 meeting fee. A pale gray banner replaced the red delinquency warning in the portal, the automatic collection notices stopped, and a certified correction letter arrived in a rigid cardboard envelope. The paper smelled faintly of toner and adhesive. The threat was gone. The accounting review took 17 days. During that time, Marla walked the neighborhood less often. Her golf cart remained plugged in beside the clubhouse, and a large HOA President badge disappeared from her blazer. Dry leaves collected around its tires. The pool cover snapped in the afternoon wind, and the clubhouse office stayed dark after sunset. The cul-de-sac noticed. The final report identified 6 payments totaling $46,782.19 that had produced no documented benefit to common property. It also found that the invoices had been divided to remain below the board vote threshold, that the descriptions had been altered between contractor submission and HOA payment entry, and that the treasurer had not received complete supporting documents. The report recommended that the review costs be recovered from the responsible officer rather than charged to the general membership. Residents would not pay twice. At a specially noticed membership meeting held after the report had been distributed to residents, Nora read the findings without embellishment. Marla sat near the end of the board table in a charcoal blazer, one hand resting on a closed clipboard, while the air vent rattled above her and the smell of wet pine drifted through an open side door. She argued that the improvements had supported unofficial association hospitality. No governing document supported that explanation. The board issued a formal demand that Marla reimburse the $46,782.19, repay $3,914.62 in independent review expenses, and cover $1,683.71 in administrative correction costs connected to Reed's penalties. It also denied her request to use HOA funds for her personal defense of the spending decisions. For the first time, every disputed dollar had a documented path back to the association. Lydia publicly acknowledged that she had signed incomplete authorizations and announced she would remain only long enough to transfer the records under the new controls. Nora then opened the properly noticed recall vote, and paper ballots were distributed across the room. Pencils scratched against folding tables. Envelopes slid into a clear acrylic box, and no one spoke while the count was completed. The result was 29-4. Marla was removed. The secretary asked for the association badge and clubhouse master key. Marla unclipped the badge slowly, placed it beside the microphone, and pushed the key across the table without looking at Reed. Residents who once stepped aside for her now remained seated. She left through the side door alone, her heels tapping across the wet concrete, until the sound disappeared beyond the parking lot. Inside, Nora continued the meeting. No one needed Marla's permission. 9 days after the recall vote, Marla Keene's attorney delivered a signed civil settlement, and the HOA entered it into the association's permanent records that afternoon. The agreement required full repayment of the $46,782.19 taken from community reserves, barred the use of association funds for her private legal expenses, and required her to reimburse the review costs and every retaliatory charge assessed against Reed Bellweather. The contractor invoice, the delivery tickets, the reserve withdrawals, and the signed completion record had formed one unbroken chain. One invoice had exposed everything. Marla had 30 days to satisfy the repayment agreement. If she defaulted, the HOA could file the agreed judgment with the court and record it against her property as permitted by state law, not against the homes of the residents she had threatened. The board also adopted a written finding that the renovation served no common area purpose and that the clubhouse had received none of the cabinetry, quartz, lighting, or heated flooring paid for with HOA funds. The conclusion was entered line by line, with no dramatic language and no room for reinterpretation. Her house had benefited. The community had not. Reed attended the final meeting from the last row, his thin folder resting unopened on his knees while late autumn wind pushed dry leaves across the clubhouse steps. The new treasurer read the repayment terms, the reserve recovery schedule, and the cancellation of every charge on Reed's account, including interest and collection preparation costs. The coffee urn clicked off near the kitchen, fresh paint from the repaired office wall mixed with the faint smell of pine cleaner, and the projector displayed a green 0 beside Reed's name. His balance was clean. Marla did not attend. Under the settlement, Marla accepted the repayment schedule, waived any claim for reimbursement of her private legal expenses, and agreed not to serve as an officer or financial signatory for 10 years. The agreement did not call her a criminal because that was never the question before the community. It called the money what it was, an unauthorized personal benefit that had to be returned. That was enough. Over the next 2 months, the HOA replaced the old spending system with dual signatures, itemized project addresses, public monthly ledgers, and automatic member access to supporting invoices. Any proposed transaction involving a director's property now required advanced disclosure, recusal, and a recorded vote before funds could be committed. Fine notices could no longer be created by one officer, and no collection step could begin without independent review. The rules finally restrained a ruler. Lydia Pike completed the transfer of records and resigned as treasurer, leaving behind a written procedure for verifying every future payment. Nora Vance supervised the first clubhouse repair contract under the new controls, which was competitively bid, openly approved, and photographed at the actual work site. Residents who had once ignored strange charges began checking their own statements, and several unsupported fees were reversed. Silence became participation. Reed declined every suggestion that he join the board. On a cold Saturday morning, he sat on his porch with a mug of coffee while sprinklers clicked off for the season and the red maple at the center of the cul-de-sac shed its final leaves. His phone displayed the HOA's first public expense report, complete with invoice numbers, approval dates, and project addresses. He read it once, then turned the screen face down. Peace had returned, but it was no longer the fragile peace created by fear. It was the quieter kind built by records, limits, and people willing to ask one precise question. Marla had believed the clipboard made her powerful. In the end, the invoice proved otherwise. This story is a fictional narrative created for entertainment, reflection, and educational purposes. Any resemblance to real people, places, or events is purely coincidental.